Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She sat at the far end, the only woman in a room of stone-faced men, their eyes locked on the maps and screens, not on her. Maybe they thought she was just a placeholder. Maybe they thought she was here because of politics or quotas or someone's favor pulled at the right time. But they didn't know. They didn't know who she was or what it had taken to get here. And she didn't tell them. Not yet. The air was heavy with stale coffee and the faint hum of the projector. A storm pressed against the windows outside the forward operating base, wind whistling against the glass like a restless ghost. Inside, voices droned on, layered with jargon, coordinates, terrain elevations, enemy estimates. But behind all the details, one truth lingered, unspoken. People were going to die on this mission. She tapped her pen, steady, rhythmic. No one looked her way. That was fine. She didn't need their recognition. She only needed their silence. When the colonel finally shifted his gaze to her, it wasn't to ask her opinion. It was to assign her task like a formality. Lieutenant, you'll be on Overwatch. North Ridge, keep our approach clean. He didn't wait for her acknowledgement. His eyes slid past, already moving on. She gave a small nod anyway, even though he hadn't looked. Overwatch, the quiet place, the invisible role. The ridge would be hers, the weight of glass against her cheek, the patience of hours, the decision of seconds. She'd done it before, too many times to count. And yet, each time carried its own ghosts. What no one in the room knew was that this mission wasn't just another set of coordinates for her. The name buried in the enemy roster, the one their intelligence whispered, the one they half believed, belonged to the man who had burned her past to ash. But she wasn't ready to say that aloud, not yet. The meeting dissolved with the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of boots. Soldiers muttered, some cracked jokes, small attempts to ease the invisible weight pressing on them. She rose slowly, gathering her folder, her rifle case slung over her shoulder like a shadow. Outside, the air hit her sharp and cold. The storm had broken into a drizzle, fine needles of rain that stuck against her face and lashes. The compound smelled of oil, wet earth, and the faint metallic tang of distant gunmetal. Engines roared in the motor pool, mechanics yelling over the noise, someone swearing about a generator that wouldn't start. Life in motion, the living pretending not to think about the dying. She moved quietly, unnoticed as she often did, a shadow in uniform, but inside her chest was anything but quiet. It was a storm of its own. Was she here for the mission, or for him? She stopped by the armory, signing out the rifle she knew like her own heartbeat. Its weight was both comfort and curse. The scope glinted under the flickering fluorescent light, and for a moment her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale, tired, with eyes that had seen too much. She tucked it away, sealed the case, and forced the thought back down. The hours until deployment ticked by like years. In the barracks, voices filled the room, low conversations about families, about the girl someone loved back home, about the kids someone hadn't met yet. She didn't join in. She sat on her bunk, boots planted firmly on the concrete floor, rifle case resting against her leg like a silent partner. One of the younger soldiers glanced her way. Private Torres, nervous, restless, always tapping his foot. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you ever, does it ever get easier?" Her eyes lifted slowly. She studied him. His face was barely touched by age, cheeks still round, innocence hanging by a thread. He was asking about death without saying the word, asking about fear without admitting it. She let the silence stretch, then finally spoke. "No, it doesn't. You just learn to carry it differently." Torres swallowed, nodded, as if her honesty was both comfort and warning. He looked away, but his foot stopped tapping. The lights dimmed early, soldiers turning in before the mission. Sleep was supposed to be a weapon, a shield for the mind. But when she lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts refused to still. The man's face kept returning, the enemy name whispered in the intelligence brief, the shadow of her past. She remembered fire, The glow against the night sky, the screams in the distance carried by wind, her family's home burning, the insignia painted across the walls. His men had done it. His orders. She had survived, but survival hadn't been life. Survival had been an oath. Now, years later, that oath was leading her to the North Ridge. Sleep never came, only the sound of rain against the tin roof. By dawn, the sky broke open in bruised shades of gray and purple. Clouds dragged heavy across the horizon. The convoy lined up, engines rumbling low, men loading gear with practiced movements. She climbed aboard the lead truck, silent among them, the rifle case resting against her knee. The road was rough, a spine of dirt and stone winding into the hills. Every bump rattled through her body, every curve tightening her chest. Around her, soldiers muttered in low tones talk of football, of food, of nothing that mattered, all ways to push the fear aside. But inside her, fear didn't vanish. It sat in her stomach like a cold stone. Not fear of death, she had made peace with that long ago. It was fear of facing him, of what she would do when she finally had the shot. Would she take it for the mission, or for herself? The ridge rose before them, jagged and silent. The convoy stopped, unloading quickly, boots splashing in mud, weapons slung tight. Orders passed in clipped voices. She moved to her position without needing guidance, boots sinking into the soaked earth, rain dripping down her helmet. At the crest, she settled into the earth, laying her rifle out with care. The glass of the scope gleamed in the pale light, and through it the valley below came alive. She could see the village, the winding road, the faint smoke rising from unseen fires. Somewhere down there the target moved. She adjusted the scope, slow, deliberate. Her breath caught for a moment, then steadied. In the distance, thunder rolled. And beneath it, faint but growing louder, came the sound of something else. The enemy was moving. Trucks. Men. A column approaching the village with a rhythm like a drumbeat. She pressed her cheek to the stock, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Through the scope, shadows resolved into faces. Hard, unyielding, carrying weapons with the ease of long practice. And then there. A face she knew. Her breath stopped, her heart hammered once hard. It was him. Older, harder, scarred by time but unmistakable, the man who had burned her world. He stepped from the truck, boots sinking into the mud, shouting orders with the same voice that had haunted her nightmares. She froze, the scope trembled slightly. This was it, the oath, the years, the ghosts. And yet the mission, the others, the team moving in the valley below, depending on her to keep them alive. Her breath shuddered in her chest. Was this her moment of vengeance, or her test of duty? She closed her eyes, steadying herself, the rain drumming against her helmet, the rifle pressing cold against her cheek. She had to decide. And whatever choice she made, it would echo forever. What held her finger back from the trigger? Through the scope, the man's face loomed sharp, clear and undeniable. He was older, yes, but the lines of command still etched his mouth, the arrogance still hardened his eyes. The rain slicked down his jaw as he barked orders to his men, pointing toward the village, toward the valley where her team was threading through cover. All it would take was one breath, one squeeze, and years of ghosts would scatter like smoke. But her finger hovered, not pressed. Duty or vengeance? The wind gusted hard across the ridge, pushing water sideways, shaking branches and rattling her nerves. She shifted slightly, adjusting the rifle against her shoulder. Her heartbeat pounded so loud she swore it might echo through the scope itself. Below, the column of enemy fighters spread out. Boots splashed through the mud, rifles slung low but ready. The man kept moving, shouting, his voice swallowed by thunder but his authority still clear. He was setting up for something, something her team couldn't see yet. Her earpiece crackled suddenly. Overwatch, this is Alpha 1, status. Her jaw tightened. Her finger pressed a little firmer against the guard. She inhaled, forcing her voice calm. Eyes on, multiple hostiles, target confirmed. A pause, engage. Her lips parted but no sound came. Lightning flared in the distance, illuminating the valley in a brief silver flash. The man's face was a ghostly mask for half a second, then darkness again. She swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the rain. "No," she whispered finally, almost to herself. Then louder into the calm, "Negative, holding, they're spreading, possible trap, advise caution." Another pause, then, "Copy that, holding position." Her chest ached, her fingers slid off the trigger. Vengeance would have to wait. The minutes crawled, heavy as lead. Through the glass she tracked movements of fighters slipping into tree lines, scattering along ridges, setting up hidden angles. It was an ambush carefully laid. If her team had pushed forward blind, they would have been swallowed whole. Her breath steadied, sharp guilt mixing with grim pride. Her restraint hadn't just been about him. It had saved lives. And yet her ghosts whispered anyway. She tracked the man as he moved further into the tree line, half shielded by branches. He looked smaller in the distance, but his shadow in her mind still towered. Every time she blinked, she saw fire again, the glow on her childhood walls, the flames swallowing photographs, the sound of her mother's voice cut off in a scream. She forced her eyes open. The scope steadied again. The village below shifted with smoke and motion. Her team crouched and waiting, the enemy slinking into positions, and in between, silence thick, unbroken, suffocating. The radio crackled once more. "Overwatch, we need a break, spot me something." She exhaled, her hand steadied, the ghosts had to wait. Her finger slid back to the trigger, not for vengeance but for them. Through the scope she scanned, found movement along the ridge. One fighter kneeling, weapon drawn, lining up on her team. She didn't think, she breathed, squeezed, and the silence shattered. The rifle cracked, the man on the ridge folded. "Shot fired," she whispered into the calm, her voice flat, steady. "One down, more incoming." Her team burst into motion below, their shadows shifting into cover, weapons flashing in bursts of fire. The ambush cracked open like glass. The enemy scattered, shouting, ducking, firing wildly. She kept her eye in the scope, pulling the world in tighter, cutting it down to faces, to rifles, to the rhythm of her breath and the thunder of her weapon. One by one she marked them. One by one they fell, each shot an act of precision, of discipline. She wasn't chasing ghosts now, she was keeping the living alive. But between bursts, her scope found him again. Not in her crosshairs, not yet, but close. He moved through the chaos with the same command as years ago, directing, pushing, rallying his men. His voice carried even through rain and gunfire, and every time she saw him, her chest constricted. She could end him right now, the opening was there. But her radio erupted with shouting. "Contact left, we're pinned. 2 wounded, need cover now." Her scope jerked to the left, her team caught in a crossfire. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but not on him. Not yet. She shifted to their attackers, sending death into the tree line, breaking the trap apart. Each shot was a choice, each breath stolen from vengeance to serve duty instead. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was the other way around. Time dissolved in thunder, rain, and the endless cycle of scanning, breathing, firing. And then silence. The valley stilled. Smoke rose from the tree line. Bodies dotted the mud, enemy rifles abandoned where they had fallen. The storm eased into a drizzle again, quiet and eerie after the chaos. Her breath shook as she lifted her head from the rifle, blinking hard. Her cheek was raw where the stock had pressed. Her hands trembled despite the steadiness she had forced. The comm crackled once more. "Overwatch status." She exhaled, clear for now. A long pause, then, "You saved us, we owe you one." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes had drifted back to the scope, to the tree line where she had last seen him. But he was gone. Her chest hollowed. The shot she hadn't taken, The face she hadn't erased had vanished back into the shadows. Duty had won, but the ghost still lived. And in that silence, a question clawed its way up inside her. Had she saved her team, or condemned them to face him another day? The convoy regrouped hours later, mud-streaked and exhausted, carrying their wounded with quiet urgency. She moved among them like a ghost herself, her rifle case once more closed, her presence unspoken. They didn't thank her, not directly, but she caught the looks, the nods, the silent recognition. It should have meant something, but it didn't. As the trucks rumbled back toward base, she stared out the window, rain streaking across the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, worn, with eyes still burning. Her team was alive, but her past was not dead. The man was out there still, breathing, commanding, waiting. And she knew, with a certainty that hollowed her chest, that their paths would cross again. Not by chance, not by orders, but by fate. She closed her eyes, her hand tightening into a fist against her knee. The oath still lived, the fire still burned. And next time she might not choose restraint. Why couldn't she sleep after saving them? The barracks were silent, except for the low hum of the generator and the occasional groan of the metal roof shifting under wind. Her team had returned bruised, mud-caked, but alive. Alive because she'd chosen restraint. Alive because she'd put duty above ghosts. So why was she lying awake, her body rigid, eyes burning into the dark? The bed beneath her felt foreign, too soft, too quiet. Her muscles ached for the ridge again, for the weight of the rifle against her shoulder, for something sharp and real. Instead, she had only silence, and silence left room for memory. The man's face kept reappearing, sharper than the thunderclaps had been. Not just his face in the valley, shouting orders, but his face in her past, fire-lit, cruel, smiling as he oversaw destruction. She pressed her palms hard against her eyes, as if pressure could erase him. It didn't. A knock broke the stillness, gentle, hesitant. She sat up immediately, boots hitting the floor, rifle case by her side in a heartbeat. Her hand hovered over it, instinct. "Ma'am," a low voice, Tor's, the young one. Her jaw unclenched. She stood, crossing to the door, pulling it open. Tor stood there in undershirt and fatigue pants, hair a mess, eyes restless. He looked like a boy who had lost his way and stumbled into a war. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. He shook his head, eyes flicking down. "No, ma'am, not after today." She studied him a moment. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it behind his back. She recognized the tremor. She lived it herself long ago. "Come in," she said. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was bare, just her bunk, her rifle case, a footlocker. He glanced around as if expecting more signs of life, but found none. She sat back on her bunk, gesturing for him to take the chair at the desk. He obeyed, perching stiffly. After a long silence, he spoke. When you shot those men today, how do you live with it? I mean, I know they were gonna kill us, but still, faces don't go away easy." Her eyes softened, just a fraction. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying his youth. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You don't live with it, not the way people think. You carry it. Sometimes heavier, sometimes lighter, but it never leaves. It becomes part of you." He swallowed hard, "So it never gets better." Her eyes dropped to the floor, her throat tightened. "It gets different. You learn to make peace with some of it, and the rest, you learn to bury until it doesn't choke you anymore." Tors nodded slowly, chewing on her words, then almost whispering, "You looked calm today, like it didn't touch you." She gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Calm is a mask, Private. Don't mistake it for peace." He blinked, surprised by her honesty. Then quietly, "Thank you." She looked up. For what? For not lying. The silence stretched again. The rain outside had eased, leaving the night eerily still. Finally she asked, "Do you have anyone waiting back home?" He nodded quickly. Yeah, my mom. She works 2 jobs, sends me letters every week even though the mail barely gets here. His eyes lowered. I haven't written back in months, don't know what to say. She stared at him. A boy caught between 2 wars, one on the field, one in his heart. She understood more than she wanted to admit. You should write her, she said softly. Doesn't matter what you say, just let her know you're still here. Tors swallowed hard, nodding again. His eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly to hide it. He stood after a long silence, squaring his shoulders. Good night, ma'am. Good night, Private. When the door closed behind him, the room fell silent again. She sat back slowly on her bunk, the faint trace of warmth from human connection lingering, but it wasn't enough to banish her ghosts. The man's face returned when her eyes closed. The fire, the screams, the oath. Sleep never came. By morning, orders had changed. The colonel's voice was gravel in the briefing room. The ambush yesterday confirmed enemy presence deeper in the valley. Intel says the commander himself is moving assets. We've got one shot before they regroup. We hit hard, cut the head, scatter the body. His words fell heavy. Every man and woman in the room stiffened. Cut the head. Her pulse spiked. Did they know? Did they realize who the head was? She scanned the faces, but no one betrayed recognition. To them, he was just another enemy leader. To her, he was everything. Her hands clenched on the table. When the colonel's eyes passed over her, he didn't pause. He didn't need to. Everyone knew her role by now. Overwatch. Always the shadow, the eye, the unseen hand. But inside her chest, something twisted. Could she remain shadow when the target was the fire that had burned her life away? The briefing ended with clipped salutes and the scrape of chairs. She rose with the others, but her feet felt heavy, as if dragging through mud. In the corridor, she heard voices, 2 soldiers joking quietly, nervous laughter bleeding through their words. It was the sound of men trying to stay human before walking into hell. She envied them. The hours before departure passed like stones grinding together. She checked her rifle twice, then again, as if perfection could quiet the storm inside her. She polished the glass of her scope until her reflection stared back pale, lined with fatigue, eyes like hollow fire. When the convoy rolled out, the sky was low and dark, clouds pressed against the mountains like a lid. The road wound deeper into territory where silence felt like a warning. No birds, no distant chatter of life, just the crunch of tires and the growl of engines. She sat rigid, her rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Around her, men muttered. Some prayed under their breath. Tors glanced at her once as if searching for calm in her mask again. She gave him nothing but silence. The valley opened before them, wide and empty, shadows pooling in the ridges. The convoy slowed, soldiers dismounting, boots crunching on gravel, orders whispered, hands checked weapons. She moved without being told, climbing toward higher ground, her body slipping into rhythm despite the storm inside her chest. The ridge embraced her, wet earth clinging to her elbows as she settled in. Through the scope the valley sharpened. The enemy was there, too still, too quiet. She scanned slowly, methodically, and then her heart clenched. Him. He stood near a cluster of ruined buildings, surrounded by men, directing, pointing. His presence bent the air around him, just as it had bent her past. Her finger found the trigger without thought. Her breath slowed. This was it, duty aligned with vengeance. The mission demanded his death. Her ghosts demanded the same. And yet her chest seized. Her radio crackled. Overwatch report. She swallowed hard. Her finger trembled. She could end it all in one pull. End him. End her oath. But something in her gut screamed, wait. Because what if it wasn't that simple? She whispered into the calm, her voice steady though her soul trembled. Target in sight. A pause, then take the shot. Her breath froze. Her finger tightened, the scope wavered. And just as she was about to squeeze, movement flickered at the edge of her vision. A child, running from one ruined wall to another, small frame darting past his men. Her heart slammed. Her shot froze in her chest. The ghosts had company now. And she realized this wasn't just war. It was something far more dangerous. Something that demanded more than vengeance. It demanded her humanity. Why did the smallest figure in the valley shake her more than the man who had burned her life away? Through the scope, she tracked the child, a blur of thin arms, mud-streaked clothes, bare feet splashing through puddles as he darted from wall to wall. He couldn't have been more than 9, 10 at most. He moved with the instinct of someone who had lived under fire too long, weaving through shadows like prey that knew the predator's rhythm. Her finger lifted from the trigger, slowly, painfully. The radio hissed in her ear. Overwatch status. Target window closing. Do you copy? Her jaw clenched. The man was still in her sights, still commanding, still drawing his web tighter around her team. All it would take was one squeeze, one exhale, the end of years of ghosts. But the child was there, running right past him. She could see it clearly, the arc of the bullet, the clean line through scope and glass and time. And she could see just as clearly how that same line could cut through innocence. One tremor, one miscalculation, one echo of thunder that would carry a child's body into the mud. Her lungs burned as if she hadn't breathed in years. Overwatch confirmed shot. Her lips parted but no sound came. Then the child tripped. A stumble, a splash. He scrambled up, face tilted just high enough for her scope to catch. Eyes wide, terrified, human. Her heart cracked in her chest. She tore her cheek away from the rifle, breath ragged. Negative, she whispered into the calm voice hoarse. Can't, not clean. Static, then anger, say again. She squeezed her eyes shut, rain dripping off her helmet into her lap. Repeat, can't, confirm shot, civilian presence, holding. Silence heavy. Then a growl through the calm. Damn it, copy. Her hands trembled as she settled back into the scope, tracking. The child was gone now, vanished into the ruins. The man was moving too, deeper into cover, shadows swallowing him whole. Her chance had dissolved. Her chance for vengeance. Her chance for duty. Both gone. Her chest hollowed, as if the valley had stolen her breath. Below, her team was still moving, still threading through danger. They didn't know why she hadn't fired. They only knew they were now walking into a fight where the head of the serpent still lived. And that weight was hers alone. Gunfire cracked suddenly, snapping her back into the present. The ambush sprang, enemy rifles lighting up the valley. Her team dove for cover, voices sharp in her ear, calling positions, shouting for cover. She forced herself back into rhythm. Breath, sight, squeeze. The rifle barked and men fell. She carved angles out of chaos, thinning the fire, breaking the trap apart. But each shot carried an echo, the one she hadn't taken, the one that mattered most. Through it all, the man's shadow flitted in her scope, always just beyond the moment, always untouchable. When the valley finally fell silent again, it was with smoke rising from wet earth and bodies sprawled where they had collapsed. Her team regrouped, voices hoarse, 2 men bleeding but alive. She didn't join them. She lingered on the ridge, scope sweeping the ruins, searching. But he was gone again. By the time she rejoined the convoy, the weight in her chest was crushing. She climbed aboard the truck, mud streaking her uniform, helmet heavy in her lap. No one spoke to her directly, but she felt the questions in the silence. Why hadn't she taken the shot? Why had the target slipped? Tor sat across from her, arm bandaged, eyes fixed on her with something between confusion and trust. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He saw enough in her silence. The ride back was endless. The road blurred under gray skis, tires throwing mud in heavy arcs. She stared out the window, rain streaking her reflection. All she saw in the glass were the child's eyes. When they reached base, the colonel's anger burned hotter than the storm. "You had him," he barked, slamming a fist against the table. "Do you understand what this means? How many more lives he'll cost?" She stood rigid, boots planted, jaw clenched. She didn't flinch, didn't answer. "You were ordered to fire," he pressed. Her voice was flat, quiet, but unyielding. There was a civilian in the line. His face darkened. Collateral is part of war. Her chest flared with heat, but her voice stayed even. "Not today." The colonel's jaw worked. He leaned close, eyes hard. "Your hesitation may have cost us everything." She didn't move, didn't blink. Inside, her heart was breaking apart, but outside she remained stone. When the meeting ended, she walked out alone. The corridors were narrow, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, walls smelling of dust and sweat. She moved like a shadow, unseen, unwanted. In the barracks, silence swallowed her. Her bunk creaked under her weight as she sat, head in hands. She disobeyed, she failed. But in the silence, another thought whispered. She had saved him. The boy, a stranger, a ghost of innocence in a valley of fire. And maybe that mattered more. Her head lifted slowly. Across the room, Tors sat hunched, scribbling on paper with a stub of pencil. He glanced up, catching her eyes for a brief moment. "Writing home?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah, like you said." His lips pressed thin, told her, "I'm still here." Her chest tightened, a small victory. She looked away, back to the rifle case leaning in the corner. Its shadow stretched long across the floor. The man was still out there, still breathing, still commanding. And one day, soon, she would have to face him again. The question was, when that moment came, would she still choose restraint? Or would the ghosts win? She closed her eyes, the image of the child and the man colliding in her mind, until she couldn't tell which one haunted her more. The silence pressed close. And she knew this war was no longer just about survival or even victory. It was about her soul. The valley had been left behind, but the weight of it followed her everywhere. Sleep refused her. Every time she closed her eyes, the child's face returned, wide, frightened eyes frozen in her scope. Some nights she woke with her heart hammering as though she'd pulled the trigger anyway. Other nights she dreamt of the man slipping into shadows, a smirk etched across his scarred face, whispering in a language she didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. "You'll never stop me." War lived in her veins, but it was doubt that kept her awake. 3 days after the failed mission, the colonel summoned her again. His office smelled of wet maps and stale coffee. He stood with his back to her, staring at a wall crowded with satellite photos. The storm outside lashed against the tin roof, a steady drumming like the march of 1,000 boots. "You've put us in a hole," he said finally. "No anger this time, just fatigue. Commands breathing down my neck. They wanted him gone years ago. Now, because of hesitation." Her shoulders stiffened. She cut him off before he could finish. "Because of a child, a civilian, not hesitation." The colonel turned, eyes narrowing. "One boy doesn't outweigh the hundreds who will die if this continues." Her chest ached at the words. She wanted to argue, to scream. But the truth dug sharp in her gut. He was right. She had spared one life at the cost of many others. But still, she met his gaze. "If I take that shot and the boy dies, then what exactly are we protecting? What do we become?" The colonel said nothing. The storm spoke for him. After a long silence, he shook his head. "You'll get another chance. Intel says he's moving again. And this time," his voice hardened, "there won't be excuses." He dismissed her with a wave, leaving her hollow. That night, Tors found her in the armory, stripping her rifle down to its bones. The pieces lay across the bench like fragments of herself. He leaned against the doorway, one arm still bandaged, watching quietly. "You did the right thing," he said. Her hands didn't stop moving. Oil, cloth, precision, anything to keep from breaking. "You weren't there," she muttered. "I saw enough," he said. I've seen men who'd shoot through a child just to prove they could. You're not one of them." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I should be." "No," his voice was iron. "Then you wouldn't be you." The silence stretched. She reassembled the rifle piece by piece, the clicks echoing like a heartbeat. When it was whole again, she set it down gently, staring at it as though it held answers. But it only stared back, a tool waiting for her decision. The next mission came faster than she expected. Dawn bled pale light across jagged hills as their convoy rolled out, tires crushing wet gravel. The air smelled of earth and fuel. Her orders were clear: overwatch again, eliminate the target, no second chances. As she settled into her position on a ridge overlooking the valley, she forced her mind into rhythm. Breath, focus, distance. But underneath the discipline, something churned. She wasn't just hunting a man. She was hunting her own hesitation. Through her scope the ruins unfolded. Smoke curled from chimneys. Figures moved through the streets, not just soldiers, but women carrying water, old men shuffling along, children darting between walls. Life, stubborn and fragile, continuing despite the war pressing on its throat. And there the man. He stood in the open this time, speaking to a cluster of fighters, his hand cutting sharp gestures through the air. He was bolder now, certain of his survival. Her finger found the trigger. "Overwatch, do you have eyes?" crackled the radio. She exhaled. Affirmative, target acquired. Orders unchanged, green to fire. The words settled heavy in her ear. Her cheek pressed against the stock. The scope narrowed the world to crosshairs and flesh. Then movement. Not a child this time, but a woman. She emerged from a doorway, clutching a bundle of laundry. She walked directly behind him, oblivious to the storm that perched above her. Her stomach twisted. One breath, one squeeze, and her bullet would pass clean through him and into her. The echo of her last mission slammed into her chest. Again, the line blurred between vengeance and sacrifice. She froze. "Overwatch, why haven't you fired?" Her lips parted, dry as ash. She didn't answer, couldn't. "Do you copy?" The voice pressed, urgent. Her finger hovered, trembling. Then the woman shifted. She moved away, back toward the doorway, bundle pressed tight against her chest. For the briefest moment, the man stood alone in her crosshairs. It was the clean shot she'd been waiting for. Her breath steadied. Her heart slammed once, twice. And yet, she hesitated. Because in her mind she could still see the child, still hear the colonel's words, still feel Tor's quiet conviction. Was she a soldier, an executioner, a protector, a ghost? The questions tore through her, louder than the storm. And in that heartbeat of hesitation, the man moved again. He stepped into cover, vanishing from her scope. Her chance dissolved. Her chest collapsed, as though the valley itself had stolen her lungs. The calm erupted with curses. "Damn it, Overwatch, you had him, twice now, twice." Her hand slipped from the rifle. She stared through the rain, the ruins blurring, her body numb. Down below, the mission unraveled. Gunfire roared, fighters scattering, her team pinned under the fury of a commander who still breathed. She forced herself back into action, snapping shots, cutting down shadows to protect her brothers. But the truth burned inside her. She had failed again. When the fight finally died, when the smoke curled and silence fell, she sat alone on the ridge, rifle cooling in her hands. No cheer, no relief, only the echo of what she hadn't done. Back at base, the colonel didn't shout this time. His disappointment was colder, sharper. "You're compromised," he said, voice flat. "Twice now you've chosen hesitation over mission. This isn't about conscience anymore. It's about reliability. And right now I can't trust you." The words hit harder than any bullet. "You're grounding me," she whispered. "I'm relieving you," he corrected, "until I decide otherwise." The room tilted. Her world, the only world she knew, slipped from her grasp. When she walked out, Torres was waiting in the corridor. His face tightened when he saw hers. "They pulled you, didn't they?" She nodded, throat tight. He cursed under his breath. "They don't get it." "Maybe they do," she murmured. He stepped closer, eyes fierce. "You're not broken. You're the only one here who still remembers what this fight is for. That matters." Her eyes burned. She wanted to believe him, wanted it desperately. But inside, she only felt the hollow weight of failure. That night she sat alone by the fence, the desert stretching endless beyond the wire. Stars bled across the sky, cold and infinite. She held the rifle across her knees, staring at it as if it might speak. Twice now she had spared life. Twice now the man had escaped. And somewhere a child still lived. Somewhere her enemy still breathed. And she was caught between them. The war was no longer on the battlefield. It was inside her. And she didn't know which side she was on anymore. The days blurred together after they stripped her of the mission. She still woke before dawn, body tuned to rhythms no longer hers to follow. Still laced her boots tight, still checked her rifle though it hadn't left its case in a week. Routine was all she had left. But without purpose, it felt like breathing underwater, slow, heavy, suffocating. Around her the base carried on. Convoys rolled out. Radios buzzed with codes and coordinates. Men came back with wounds, some with silence in their eyes. And she drifted through it like a ghost. But ghosts see what others don't. From the fence line she watched dust clouds rise far beyond the hills. Smoke that didn't belong to their artillery. Shadows moving where none should. Something was building out there. Something big. The colonel ignored her. Command had written her off, but Torres listened. Late one night, he found her in the mess hall, staring at untouched food. The hum of the generator filled the silence between them. "You're right," he said finally. She blinked. About what? About something moving out there. Patrol ran into a supply route yesterday. They're stockpiling, planning. Her pulse quickened, and command. Doesn't want to hear it. They're focused on the next op, the one you're not part of. The words stung, though she tried not to show it. He leaned closer, voice low. "But I don't trust their intel, I trust yours." For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark, faint but real. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling, her mind circling like a hawk. She was out, stripped of authority. No orders, no mission. But that didn't erase what she saw, didn't erase who she was. If something was building beyond those hills, and if command was blind to it, then wasn't silence another form of betrayal? But what could she do? Her whole life had been built around obedience, duty, chain of command. Breaking it meant more than risk, it meant exile. Her chest tightened with the weight of the choice. Then she remembered the boy in her scope, the woman with laundry in her arms, the lives caught between crosshairs and orders. And she realized something. Her loyalty wasn't to the colonel, it wasn't to command, it was to the people who had no voice in this war, the ones who would bleed when men like him made mistakes. For the first time, her path felt clear. 2 nights later, Torres handed her a folded map under the hum of dim red lights in the barracks. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Routes, supply points, a pattern forming across the valley. "What are you going to do?" he asked. She looked up at him, the answer already burning in her chest. "Find him, end it." His jaw tightened. "You'll be court-martialed if they find out." "I'll be worse than that if I stay silent." For a moment he said nothing, then he nodded. "Then I'm in." She shook her head. "No, you've done enough. You nearly lost your arm last time, this one's mine." He hesitated, pain flickering in his eyes, but he didn't argue, he knew better. She left before dawn, alone. No convoy, no comms, just a pack, her rifle, and the sound of her own boots crunching on stone. The desert stretched endless around her, the horizon bleeding into pale fire as the sun rose. Every step was risk, every breath a reminder that she was no longer shielded by uniform or orders. If she was caught, she'd be a traitor. But something in her heart felt lighter. For the first time, she wasn't following orders. She was following conscience. The journey took 2 days. She slept in shallow gullies, ate rations by the glow of a fatting moon, moved only when shadows stretched long enough to hide her. And on the third night she found it. The valley floor opened below her like a scar, a hidden camp carved into the earth. Fires burned low, illuminating stacks of crates, rows of weapons, fuel drums waiting for flame. Fighters moved like restless ants, preparing for something vast. Her chest tightened. Tors had been right, command had been blind. And at the center of it all, him. The man she had spared, twice. He stood in the firelight, his voice carrying through the night, words sharp and fervent. She didn't understand the language, but she didn't need to. His gestures told the story. This was no longer small raids. This was an army about to rise. Her hand found the rifle, the scope glinting faint moonlight. For the third time, she lined him up. Crosshairs over his chest, her finger brushing the trigger. But she didn't fire. Not yet. Because something inside whispered, if you end him now, the others scatter. But the fire he lit, it still burns. This isn't just about him anymore. Her breath shivered. The camp bustled below, a hive of shadows. Too many to take alone, too much to dismantle with one shot. She needed proof. Proof command couldn't ignore. She lowered the rifle, heart pounding, and began to crawl closer. Hours later, she slipped back into the hills, pack heavier with stolen maps, hastily snapped photographs, scraps of evidence she could barely fit inside. But as she turned to leave, a voice cut through the night. "Stop!" Her blood froze. He stood there, the man, not 20 feet away, his silhouette framed by firelight, his eyes locked on hers, and in that moment she knew. He remembered her. Twice spared, twice escaped, and now here they were again. A faint smile touched his lips, more shadow than flesh. He raised a hand, not to a weapon, but in something like acknowledgement. Then, without a word, he stepped back into darkness. She stood frozen, chest hammering, the stolen evidence burning in her pack. Why hadn't he stopped her? Why hadn't he ordered her death? The question seared as she fled into the night. She reached base 3 days later, ragged, hollow-eyed, her pack clutched like a lifeline. Command listened this time. They couldn't ignore the evidence spread across the colonel's desk, roots, weapons, proof of a storm about to break. But as they argued over strategy, airstrikes, and timelines, she stood in the corner silent. Her thoughts weren't on the maps. They were on him. The way he had looked at her, the way he had let her go. And the question that tore at her with every breath. Was it mercy, or was it something darker? That night, alone in her bunk, she traced the memory of his smile like a scar on her mind. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what he saw in her, and why he had chosen to let her live. She didn't tell them everything. Not about the firelight, not about the way he had looked at her, not about how he'd let her go. That detail she kept buried, locked tight in her chest, where no report could touch it, because it wasn't just an omission. It was a secret that gnawed at her, whispering questions she didn't dare face. Why had he spared her? Why had she spared him? And what did it mean that they both had done it, more than once? Command planned their offensive. Maps spread across tables. Voices argued over strike zones, logistics, collateral damage. To them, he was a target, a problem to solve with numbers and bombs. To her, he had become something else. A mirror. One she didn't want to look into, but couldn't turn away from. Tors noticed before anyone else. "You're quieter than usual," he said one morning when they sat smoking outside the barracks. Dawn bled pink into the desert sky. She shrugged, not much to say. He studied her, the kind of silence that cut deeper than words. You saw him, didn't you? Her hand froze on the cigarette. What makes you say that? The way you carry it. You don't just want him gone, you want to understand him. The words stung because they were true. I don't care about understanding, she lied. Tors shook his head. Then why are you lying to me? She had no answer. The strike began 2 weeks later. Jets thundered overhead. Artillery rumbled through the night. The earth shook under their boots as fire rolled across the valley. She watched from the ridge as explosions bloomed, tearing apart the hidden camp she had crawled through alone. Fuel drums ignited, sending black smoke clawing into the sky. Fighters scattered like ants. And yet amid the destruction, one thought burned sharper than all the rest. Is he still alive? She hated herself for it. Hated the knot of dread and relief tangled together in her chest. Because she knew the truth before anyone said it. The camp was rubble, the fighters broken, but he, the man, had vanished again. The colonel raged, his fury filling the command tent like storm winds. He slips through our fingers every time, every damn time. She stood in the corner silent. Because deep down, she wondered if he was slipping through their fingers, or if he was slipping through hers. Days turned into weeks. Small skirmishes flared, roadside bombs tore through convoys, whispers spread through the villages. He was alive, regrouping, building again. Each time his shadow returned, so did the gnawing thought that this wasn't coincidence. It was connection. She began to feel him everywhere, in the silence between gunfire, in the pause before orders, in the weight of the rifle in her hands. And in her dreams. Always in her dreams. One night, unable to bear it, she left her bunk and walked to the fence. The desert stretched endless, the stars cold and merciless above. She gripped the wire until it cut her palms, whispering into the emptiness. Why me? The night didn't answer. But deep inside she already knew. Because war wasn't just about killing, it was about choices, and somehow he had seen hers. And now it felt as if he was waiting for her to make another. The next mission was supposed to be routine, recon in a nearby village, check for supply caches, nothing more. But the moment she stepped into the narrow streets, something felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. Children watched from windows, eyes wide and unblinking. Dogs barked once, then fell silent. And then a voice. Her blood froze. Not in English, not shouted, just a murmur carried on the wind, but she knew it, she knew him. Her chest tightened. She broke from the patrol, slipping down an alley, rifle raised. And there, in the shadows of a crumbling wall, he stood. Closer than he had ever been. No scope, no distance, just flesh and bone, eyes locked with hers. For a moment, the world held its breath. He didn't raise a weapon, didn't move. Just studied her, as if the war outside didn't exist. Her finger hovered on the trigger. One squeeze, end of story. But her body refused. Because he wasn't aiming at her. He wasn't even reaching for a gun. He just stood there, silent. Finally, in rough, accented English, he spoke. You could have killed me twice. Her throat tightened. You could have killed me tonight, she whispered back. A faint smile touched his lips, but then who would you be? The question cut deeper than any bullet. Before she could answer, a shout erupted behind her, Tor's voice, boots pounding. She turned, and when she looked back, he was gone. Like smoke. Like a ghost. The patrol returned to base with nothing but questions. Tors pressed her for answers, but she gave him none. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't trust herself. Her silence grew heavier with each passing day. The colonel called her reckless. Command began whispering of reassignment. Tors tried to keep her steady, but even he could see it. She was unraveling. Because it wasn't just about killing him anymore. It was about why she couldn't, and whether deep down she even wanted to. One night, unable to bear the silence, she opened her journal, a habit she hadn't touched in years. She wrote not as a soldier, but as a woman. About the child she hadn't killed. About the woman carrying laundry. About the way war reduced life to decisions no one should ever have to make. And about him, the enemy who refused to die. The man who, in some twisted way, seemed to understand her better than the people she fought beside. She closed the journal with shaking hands, tears burning her eyes. For the first time since she'd arrived in this desert, she felt less like a soldier and more like a prisoner, trapped between two truths she couldn't reconcile. The next day, she was summoned again. The colonel's face was stone. "You're being reassigned." Her chest tightened. "Where?" "Home." The word hit harder than a shell. "You're pulling me out. You've become a liability to yourself, to this unit, to the mission." She wanted to argue, to fight, but the weight of his gaze told her it was useless. Her war was over. At least that's what he thought. But as she packed her gear in silence, one truth burned hotter than all the rest. The war wasn't finished. Not for her. Not for him. Not until they faced each other one last time. That night, as the plane waited on the tarmac, she sat in the dark, hands clenched tight around her rifle. Her orders said to go home. Her heart said otherwise. She had one choice left. And she knew, deep down, it would define who she truly was. The engines roared in the dark, their vibrations humming through the tarmac, promising escape. The plane sat ready, its lights stabbing into the night. Her name was on the manifest. Her war was supposed to be over. But she didn't move. Her hand clutched the strap of her pack, knuckles pale. Her rifle rested against her knee. The air smelled of fuel and dust, but underneath it something else lingered, the scent of unfinished business. She could step onto that plane, vanish into silence, let others finish what she began. But the truth was merciless. This wasn't about others anymore. This was about him. The man she had spared, the man who had spared her. The war wasn't on the battlefield now. It was between them. And until it ended, she could not leave. She slipped into the desert before dawn, leaving her orders on the seat of the transport. No one stopped her. No one noticed. By the time the sun rose, she was gone. For 2 days she tracked the whispers, villagers who wouldn't meet her eyes, roads that ended in silence, smoke on the horizon too thin to be cooking fires. Each step carried her deeper into his shadow. And on the third night she found it. A ruined compound, half swallowed by sand and time. Torchlight flickered from within. Guards stood restless at the gate, rifles loose in their hands. Her heart pounded. She had come alone. No backup, no orders, no guarantee of return. But she wasn't here for survival. She was here for truth. She crawled through the ruins, silent as stone, until she reached the shattered wall. Through a gap she saw him. Sitting by a fire. Not surrounded by men, not armored with power, but alone. As if he had been waiting for her. Her breath caught. Scope crosshairs distance. She could end it here, clean, final. But something in her chest held her still. Because she knew this wasn't just about a bullet. It was about what came after. She slipped inside. The guards never saw her, or maybe they did and chose not to. She couldn't tell anymore where the line of fate ended and choice began. When she stepped into the firelight, he looked up. No shock, no anger, just recognition. Like two threads pulled tight, meeting where they were always meant to. "You came," he said in rough English. Her rifle stayed raised. "You knew I would." He nodded slowly. "3 times you had me. 3 times you let me live." Her chest tightened. "Twice I couldn't, once I chose." His eyes glinted in the firelight. And still you're here. Why? The question cut her open. She wanted to say duty, wanted to say orders, but the words felt hollow. I don't know, she whispered. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're not like them. You fight, but not for power, not for hate. You fight because you must, but you don't believe in it. Her throat ached. And what do you believe in? He was silent for a long moment. Then softly, survival, my people's survival. Yours want me gone. Mine want me to fight. Somewhere between, we all burn. The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the night. She lowered the rifle just slightly. Then stop, she said. The words came raw. Stop before it takes everything. A faint smile touched his lips, sad, tired. And you, will your war stop if I fall? The truth silenced her, because she knew the answer. Even if he died here tonight, the war would go on. Another would rise, another mission, another order. This wasn't about ending a man. It was about ending the war inside herself. Her finger tightened on the trigger. One breath could finish it. But she didn't pull. Not this time. Instead, she lowered the rifle fully, the weight of it sliding from her shoulder. His eyes widened, not in triumph, not in mockery, but in something like respect. You finally chose, he murmured. She exhaled, chest trembling. I chose me. For a long moment, they just sat in the firelight. Two enemies, two survivors, neither willing to destroy the last fragment of humanity left between them. Then voices outside, boots crunching, shouts cutting through the night. Her heart lurched. Command, they had found her. The door splintered open. Light noise, rifles raised. But in the chaos, she and he remained still, staring at each other, bound by a silence deeper than orders. Then he slipped back into the shadows, vanishing once more, as though the fire itself had swallowed him whole. When the soldiers dragged her out, shouting questions, rifles still hot, she said nothing. Because some truths couldn't be spoken. Days later, she sat in the colonel's office, wrists unshackled but heavy with consequence. You disobeyed direct orders, he said coldly. She met his gaze. Yes. You deserted your unit. Yes. You could face prison, dishonor, everything you built gone. She didn't flinch. So be it. He studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed. You've changed, he said. She almost laughed. No, I've finally stopped changing for you. His jaw tightened, but he said no more. When she walked out, Tors was waiting. You're free to go, he murmured. Free, she echoed, as though tasting the word for the first time. The desert wind brushed against her face, warm and endless. For the first time, she felt no orders pressing on her chest, no mission pulling at her ribs. Only silence. Only herself. That night she stood at the fence again, staring into the dark horizon. Somewhere out there he still lived. And she didn't know if their paths would cross again. But for the first time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt whole. Because she had chosen, not command, not revenge, not fear. Herself. The war inside her had finally gone quiet. And as the desert stars burned cold and bright above, a final truth settled in her chest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence it endures.